Hi there. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you step by step how to do overlay mosaic crochet. I'm going to cover the basics of mosaic crochet, like how to read an overlay mosaic chart, ways to attach your yarn, the stitches that you're going to use, and more. If you're new to overlay mosaic crochet and ready to explore a new technique, then this is a great place to start. To follow along with today's tutorial, you're going to need two different yarn colors. In Mosaic, we use two different colors, and we'll explain what this means later, but one yarn will be labeled A and one yarn will be labeled B. You want your yarn to be as contrasting as possible. I really like white and black, or white and any color that's got a lot of saturation to it. And in here we've used two different shades of green, but they have enough contrast to make my design pop out. And that's why that contrast is so important. So for my color A yarn, I'm using Yarnspirations Bernat Super Value here in the color Grass. And then for my color B, the darker color here, I'm using the same yarn line in the color Teal Heather. You'll also need a crochet hook in a size that works with your yarn. I am using a 5.5mm or I crochet hook. This is the Furls Odyssey 2 crochet hook. This is a new crochet hook that I'm obsessed with, and I'm using it for everything lately. I highly recommend them if you're looking for a good ergonomic hook. You'll need a pair of scissors, and if you'd like, it's totally optional, but when you're first getting started, it can be tricky to find the first and last stitch when you're crocheting, so stitch markers can help keep track of those for you, but it's totally optional. So in my little swatch here, we have used this chart, and that's what we're going to be following along with today. You will need the chart. You can follow along here on the video because it should be easy to see because I've printed it quite large here, but it's also available to view for free on my blog, theloopylamb.com, and I will link to that in the description box below for you. So before we get into the actual crocheting, I want to talk about a little bit about the technique itself because it's quite unique and there are a lot of different mosaic crochet techniques, and I want to talk about this one specifically. So for overlay mosaic crochet, it's obviously a crochet color work technique, and in this technique you work one color per row. The right side of your work is always facing you, which means you're never turning your work over. You're always going to have this work front side or the right side facing you. You will cut your yarn at the end of every row. That's why you see these yarn tails at the end. That can be a little overwhelming for some folks, but trust me, there are lots of ways to deal with them that don't involve weaving them in, and we'll cover that in another video. The stitches used in this technique are just single crochets and double crochets, so it's really a beginner friendly. And the reason it's called overlay mosaic crochet, and I want to point this out here, is because you see this stitch here. This is what we call a drop down double crochet. And if you put your hook behind it, you take a look, I'm trying to pull it out gently, you can see that there are stitches behind it. And that's because your drop down stitches, which help to create your images, they overlay or sit on top of your other rows of work. So there's also called inset mosaic, and it's in the name that you understand where overlay comes from. Inset means that your stitches are inset, kind of like a mesh sort of together, where overlay, your stitches sit on top of the other rows. Now let's take a look at our chart. Now, like other colorwork charts, your mosaic chart is read from right to left for right-handed crocheters and left to right for left-handed crocheters. I'm right-handed today, so I'm going to be showing you following the chart from right to left. In this chart, most mosaic charts will actually start on row 3. These are our row numbers up the right-hand side here, and also on the left hand. And they start on row 3 because we have to create what are called foundation rows, which I'll show you how to do in a moment. And so your charts, most of them will start on row 3. If they start on a different number, you'll have to double check the designer's notes, because how these charts are created varies from designer to designer essentially, but they all share the same information. They'll show you which colors to use per row. They'll show you where to work your single crochets and where to work your double crochets or your drop down doubles. So here in this column here, I've added a label for which yarn color we're using per row. So A and B, A and B. And then along the bottom here, we've got our stitch numbers. So you can see from beginning to end for our swatch, we have 18 stitches. The symbols here, I use this. This is not, a lot of people use this, but it's not super common because this will be the entire project. I've added our, what they call border stitches to the beginning and end of my rows. This is a beginning border stitch marked by a triangle, which means single crochet under both loops. And this is an ending border stitch marked by a circle, which just means it's the last stitch of the row and it's single crochet worked under both loops. Drop down double crochets are marked with an X. Sometimes other symbols are used, but most commonly it's an X. And then any of these boxes in your chart that are blank, regardless of what color they are back loop single crochets. Now, one of the common questions that I get asked when I'm showing this technique is, what if this box here shows no markings, but the one above it is an X, so it's a drop down double. That means that this stitch here is a back loop only single crochet, but it's covered by your drop down double. So you would just continue, you would assume that this is actually a white stitch underneath, because the A on this chart is white, that the stitch underneath is a back loop single and it's just covered by the double, because they want, designers want you to see what your image will look like as you're working. So that's why there's a little confusion there. But I find it easier to just hop on in and see how this kind of works out into actual stitches. So let's start working. So you're going to need to start with your color A yarn. Let me just put the chart up here so I can make room for my yarn. I'm going to put a slip knot on our hook here. And now remember where I said that a lot of the charts start on row 3 because there's foundation rows? That's what we're going to start with here. So you always start with 2 rows of single crochet, and those are your foundation rows. So for our first row here, I need 18 stitches, and because it's single crochet, I'm going to add 1 for my turning chain. So I'm going to need 19 chains to get 18 stitches. So we'll start with our 19 chains. All right, so I've got my 19 chains, and starting in the second chain from the hook, I'm going to single crochet across. I'm just going to work into my chain normally, but I personally prefer to work in the back bump of the chain because it creates a really nice bottom. So you can do that if you'd like, but we're just going to work into the chain as normal here. So now that I've worked my single crochet into all of the remaining chains, your work should look like this. If it twists, that's totally normal. Don't worry about it. It will flatten out as we work. So now that we've done our last stitch, we need to fasten off. I'm going to cut my yarn. I like to leave at least 4 to 6 inches. Again, there's ways for you to deal with these yarn ends. Just don't worry about them right now. We're just going to focus on understanding the technique, and then in a different video we'll talk about the ends. So now that we're finished fastening off, I'm going to yarn over with that yarn tail and pull that through my loop on my hook, and then I'm just going to pull up tight on that to fasten off my row. Now I'm going to grab my color B. My color B is that teal heather one, and you can attach your yarn to the first stitch of your row in a couple of ways. You can use a slip stitch, chain 1, and then single crochet in this stitch, or you can do what is called a standing single crochet. I personally prefer this because this technique has a tendency to want to lean to one side, and this can help to minimize that lean because the bulky join of a slip stitch and a single and a chain will cause it to lean a little bit. So what we're going to do is with your slip stitch on your hook, or slip knot on your hook, I should say, sorry, you're going to insert your hook under both loops of that very first stitch. Then we're going to yarn over and pull up a loop. You should have 2 loops on your hook. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through both loops on our hook. And that's your standing single crochet completed. This technique can be used in a lot of different ways. And if you need to see that slower, I have a tutorial here on the blog to show you that. So we're doing our second foundation row here. And what we do is we are going to work our single crochets in the back loop only of each stitch across until one stitch remains. So we have the front loop, which is the loop closest to us, and the one furthest from us is the back loop. So we're just going to back loop only, single crochet into each stitch across. Now these foundation rows have to be done before you start your chart in order for your chart to work. All right, so we have one stitch left to be worked, and in that last stitch we're going to work our single crochet under both loops here, and we're going to insert our hook and just single crochet under both loops. Now, when we reach the end of our row, we have to fasten off. So I'm going to cut my yarn, leaving that 4 to 6 inches. Then yarn over and pull that yarn tail through the loop on my hook to fasten off. And so these are your foundation rows, and this is how all Overlay Mosaic Crochet charts start. So now we're going to actually bring our chart in, because this is where the chart work begins on row 3. So in row 3, we can see that we are starting with color A. So I'm going to grab my grass color and place a slip knot on my hook. And then I'm going to start, it says, with a beginning border stitch. So you can use that, again, your slip stitch, chain 1, single crochet, their standard join, or you can use our standing single crochet join, which I'm going to. So inserting under both loops here with the slip knot on my hook. I'm going to yarn over, pull up a loop, then yarn over and pull through 2. And that's our beginning border stitch. We've got 2 X's here in our chart, and that means we're going to be working 2 drop down double crochets. So when we work a drop down double crochet, we're always connecting our current yarn color to the same yarn color 2 rows below. So we're going to find that front loop only of the same color 2 rows below, and the stitches stack on top of each other, so it's pretty easy to find which stitch you're working in. So if this would be the next stitch and we're going to the next color, we're just going doop, right down here. So we're going to yarn over and insert our hook into the front loop only of that same color 2 rows below. And we yarn over, pull up a loop, 3 loops on our hook, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. And that's our first drop down double crochet. And we're going to do the same thing in this next stitch here. Yarn over, insert our hook in the front loop of the next stitch here. Yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. All right, so there are our first 3 stitches of our chart. And then our next instructions, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks with nothing in them. And that means we're working back loop only, single crochets. Now, before we go on, I want to just quickly note that when you work your drop down doubles, you're skipping the stitches in the row of the opposite color behind it. If you've ever done cables, post stitches, it's the same kind of thing. You skip the stitches behind them. Right, so that means we're skipping 2 stitches because we did 2 drop down stitches, and then we're working directly into that next stitch here. So we're going to do 5 back loop only single crochets. So insert our hook under that back loop and single crochet, and then we're going to do that 4 more times. So now we've got our 5 back loop only single crochets, and remember, even though the color of the square is black, it's still going to be a back loop only single crochet in our current color, because again, those drop downs sit over top of them. So here we're on stitches 9 and 10, and we're doing 2 drop down stitches again, drop down doubles. So again, yarn over, insert our hook into the front loop only of the stitch 2 rows below in the same color. and then double crochet. Okay, and then we're doing that again into this next stitch. And then that's what we have so far. We've got those next two drop down double crochets, and then we're going to work 5 back loop only single crochets because we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blank boxes. So those are our back loop onlys. Just remember to skip those 2 stitches behind the drop downs we just did. And then we're doing 5 back loop only singles. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So next up in stitches 16 and 17, we're doing drop down double crochets. So again, and we have 1 stitch left to be worked, and we've got this circle here, and that just means it's an ending border stitch, which is your single crochet worked under both loops. All right, now we fasten off at the end of our row. And again, yarn over and pull that yarn tail through the loop on our hook and pull that tight. So this is what your piece should look like at the end of row 3. Right? So moving into row 4, we're moving back to color B here, which is my teal heather. And again, I'm going to be using that standing single crochet join. You can join however you'd wish, as long as you're working a single crochet under both loops here. So now that I've done my beginning border stitch, which is my standing single crochet here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes here with nothing in them. So that means 4 back loop only single crochets. Now we're going to go 1, 2, 3, and 4. Our next stitch here on the chart shows an X, which is a drop down double crochet. And so again, I like to use the phrase like to like or same to same. We're using the same yarn to the same yarn. You should never be joining your color B to your color A. So we're going to go 2 rows below, 1, 2, and we're going to join in the front loop of the stitch with the same color and do our drop down double crochet. Right. Now in our chart, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blank boxes, and that means we're going to work 6 back loop only double crochets. 1, 2, and 6. And then we're here now, and we're going to do another drop down double crochet. Again, working in the same color, 2 rows below in the front loop. And don't forget to be skipping that stitch behind the drop down double. Now we've got 4 blank boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 4 back loop only single crochets. And then in our last stitch here, we've got a ending border stitch, which is just single crochet under both loops. And at the end of our row, we're cutting our yarn and fastening off. And so this is what your work should look like at the end of row 4. You can see that our kind of image is starting to shape up here. We've got the bottom of this box started and our drop down. Now, one thing I want to note is as a troubleshooting measure, Your stitch count on every row should be the exact same. It should never change. If your stitch count is off, it could be that you're not skipping your stitches behind the double crochets, or in my instance, sometimes I skip a back loop only. So make sure that your stitch count isn't changing at the end of every round. Okay, so now we are moving into row 5. So row 5 here, we are working with color A again. We're going to start with that beginning border stitch, or again, the standing single crochet worked under both loops. And then we're starting with 2 drop down double crochets. So we see here 2 rows below, we've got drop down double crochets already. We're going to be working in the front loops of those stitches. So it doesn't really matter what the stitch you did in the previous row is, as long as the front loop is available, that's where you will connect to it. So we're going to drop down into the front loop of that drop down double and work another drop down double, and we'll do that in the very next stitch. Don't forget to skip those stitches behind, friends. All right, so then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blank stitches or blank boxes. So we're going to do 5 back loop only single crochets. So starting in the very next stitch, back loop single, we're doing 5 of these. Our next 2 stitches are drop down doubles. Again, we're skipping those 2 stitches behind them. And then we've got 5 blank boxes, so 5 back loop only single crochets. Then we've got 2 drop down double crochets. And our last stitch, as always, is a single crochet under both loops, which we call an ending border stitch. And then we're going to fasten off. And so here is our work here up to row 5. Now we're going to start row 6, and row 6 we're grabbing yarn color B here again. So I'm going to attach my yarn into the first stitch under both loops in my preferred method. I'm using the standing single again. And that is our beginning border stitch. Then we've got 2 blank boxes, so we're doing 2 back loop only single crochets. Our next stitch here is a drop down double. So again, because we're using color B, we're joining yarn, the same yarn to the same yarn, so color B to color B. Drop down double. And then we've got 1, 2, 3 blank boxes, so 3 back loop only single crochets. Our next stitch here is a drop down double. And then we've got 2 blank boxes, so back loop only single crochets. We have another drop down double crochet. Three back loop onlys. Another drop down double crochet. Two back loop only single crochets. And finishing with a ending border stitch, which again is this single crochet worked under both loops. And then we will fasten off our yarn again. So this is what our work looks like at the end of row 6. You can start to see these boxes in our graph take shape. And for our chart, if you take a look, you've probably already noticed that we've done a few rows or a couple of rows that are the same. So like row 5 here is the same as row 3, and row 7 is the same as row 3s and 5. So we've hit the end of our pattern repeat or our row repeat. So from rows 7 on, we're going to repeat rows 3 through 6. Now, if we wanted to say balance our image or mirror it so it looked exactly the same as the beginning, we're going to work rows 3, 4, and 5 one more time. So rows 3, 4, and 5 would be the same as rows 7, 8, and 9. So let's do row 7 together here so we can see how these boxes kind of close off. All right. So we're grabbing for yarn color A again. And we're attaching it to create our beginning border stitch under both loops of that first stitch. So row 7, we've got our 2 drop down double crochets, followed by 5 blank boxes, which are back loop only single crochets. So 5 back loop only single crochets here, 2 and 5, followed by 2 drop down double crochets, followed by 5 back loop only single crochets. And then we've got our 2 drop down double crochets. And we end with our ending border stitch, which again is our single crochet under both loops. Now that we're done the row, we're going to fasten off. And so you can see now that we have completed one full box of our chart. And as I said, if you wanted to balance your image, like in my first chart here, where the beginning and the end look exactly the same, then you would repeat rows 3, 4, and 5 one more time after you complete your finish working. So if I was following this chart and we finished off at row 7, I could go to row 11, which is the same as row 7, and then I would go back and repeat rows 3, 4, and 5. So it would end looking the same as the beginning. And that's how you do overlay mosaic crochet. I hope that you found this helpful. I've already got a few overlay mosaic crochet projects available on my blog. Some are squares and we have lots more coming. So I hope that you found this technique tutorial helpful and that you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button and please consider subscribing to this channel. If you like free crochet patterns, please check out my blog, theloopylamb.com, where I've got over 200 free crochet patterns, many of which have step-by-step video tutorials just like this one. Thank you so much for watching, friends. Happy crocheting, and I'll see you next time.